Greetings to each and every one of you, wherever you are. My name is Cesar Di Mello, and on behalf of Pax Christi Asia Pacific and Pax Christi International, I welcome you to this webinar. Thank you for joining. As is customary in Australia, where I'm speaking from, we begin by acknowledging the land of the First Nations peoples, the traditional custodians for more than 60,000 years. And just to note that sovereignty over land and sea has never been ceded. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of Australia, their spirituality, and their elders, past, present, and emerging. In the same spirit, we acknowledge the lands and traditional cultures of the places where you are coming from. Opting for nonviolence over the logic of violence is the title of this webinar. The flyer you would have received gives an idea of what will engage this webinar. The power of nonviolence is that it is a creative force that can help humanize our existence across differences and divides. The logic of violence is that it is grounded in domination and control. We have three presenters tonight who will develop and explore some aspects of this subject. Our first speaker is Nicolas Paz. Nicolas is the director of the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative Program of Pax Christi International. He's an experienced civil mediator in conflict resolution and nonviolence. He's also a faculty member of the Pontifical University in Salamanca in Spain. Nicolas is a member of the coordinating committee of the Catholic Institute for Nonviolence, the European Academy of Religion, and the European Radicalization Awareness Network. He has trained in conflict resolution and nonviolence in relation to various fields and professions, including peace workers, NGO workers, teachers, politicians, and others. Over to you, Nicolas.
Thank you, Cesar, and thank you all Pax Christi Asia Pacific for organizing this wonderful and exciting gathering, and all of you who are listening to us today that we are sharing. It's really an honor to be with all of you, and well, I hope to humbly contribute to our conversation, and please do not hesitate to make any questions. So after this, we can try to answer them. Well, as all you know and experience it, unfortunately, violence touches so many lives and in so many spaces, you know, in our streets, in our own homes, in the silent wars of poverty and injustice, and in the whole creations that suffer our violences. And here today I want to briefly and humbly present a little bit about the work of the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative that we hope to contribute to, organize hope and to bring the best practices and the best lessons from everywhere in this common home on nonviolence, so we can learn from what others are doing and try to make our spaces, our lives nonviolent. Let me share my screen. I have brought a little presentation for you. Well, the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, it's a program of Christi International. It well, officially it oh, let me see if it works. Sorry. Yeah, it. Oh, sorry. No, it officially was born in 2016 after some conference at the Vatican organized by Pax Christi and the Dicastery. And there you can see what has been our, and it's still our aims, our goals, and our vision. We want this work is based on the whole work, and it's grounded on the deep experience and commitment on nonviolence developed by the whole Pax Christi family all over the world, and others, organizations, indigenous communities, and activists working also on nonviolence. And as you see there, basis on that experience, what we are trying to do is to move active nonviolence into the heart of our Catholic Church by showing how nonviolence is at the heart of the gospel. It's on the core message of Jesus, how nonviolent strategies and tools are effective. And this entails like bringing the best research, the best practices, the best experiences, learning from them, and then teaching, bringing the voices of the grassroots, because we truly believe that the church can contribute to a profound change in the world through its teaching, dissemination, practice, and witness. And the more we learn about nonviolence, the more we can teach it, and the more we can improve it and bring and build that an armed and disarming peace that Pope Leo is calling all us to bring to our world. So this, what I'm presenting here, is not, it's not my work, my job, or even the work of CNI itself. It's part of a global movement on nonviolence that tries to work together, and that fortunately in the last decade has improved. It's more connected. It has more. It has learned more. It knows better how to apply nonviolent strategies, and we are trying to learn one to each other. It's a deep grassroots movement, and with a very spiritual commitment to make this journey together, and we are part of that. So apart from today sharing with you some of the key lessons we have learned from that, I am also here to learn from all of you and your own experiences. The last project of the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, and that we are working hard to make it more and more real every day is the Catholic Institute for Nonviolence that was launched last September, and which aim is to make nonviolence research, resources, and all these experiences more accessible to all the Catholic Church, to its leaders, but also to the communities and every institution, so that we as the people of God can deepen on the Catholic understanding and commitment to the practice of gospel nonviolence. This institute is mainly virtual, but it aims to have a regular presence in Rome, so that this global conversation and this deep experience from the peripheral existences, as Pope Francis love to name them, are listened and are known also at the hierarchy of the Catholic Church and at the Vatican. So as I say, this institute is mainly virtual, but it is having a regular presence in Rome with different activities to make all this learning known there. The institute is organized in 3 big areas of concentration. One is on the gospel nonviolence, so that's the theological and the spiritual roots of nonviolence, and the message of the scriptures and the message of Jesus. Another of the section is on the nonviolent practices and strategic of power, so bringing the best empirical research on knowing how nonviolence works, where it works, and how and why it works. And also bringing the contextual experience of nonviolence. And this is also key because we are not trying to impose by any kind a notion from the top of what nonviolence is, but just the opposite, like learning from the grassroots, from the indigenous communities, from everyone practicing and living nonviolence, how they understand nonviolence, how they practice it, how they use it, how they live it. So it's key to know how nonviolence looks like in every place in the world, because it looks different, and this diversity, it's the richness of this movement and the richness of this knowledge and spiritual path for all of us. It's a never-ended learning process for all of us. We are passionate about nonviolence. And I also wanted to share with all of you when we talk about nonviolence, and I don't want to this be missed, we are always trying to show that it's different dimensions, and it's not only about tactics or strategies that more focus on nonviolent action. It's first of all, for all of us, it's an spirituality, it's a way of life, it's rooted in the life of Jesus, it's Jesus' love in action, but it's also a method for transformation and for change that has strategies, tactics that can be learned and taught. It's a way of life, it's a way of being in the world, it's a way of being with others. It's love your enemies, put it into practice. And it's a potential universal ethic, making that an armed and disarming peace centered on nonviolence. These 4 dimensions are all the time rooted on the work we are trying to do at Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, and that we want to share and be part of all the work you are doing in different parts of the world, here also in the Asia Pacific region. And finally, and not to stand long so we can have laterly a conversation, I just wanted to bring today, probably also for that questions, some of the lessons we have already learned on nonviolence. And this is learned precisely by the practice, by the commitment of so many people in the world, trying to struggle with different kinds of violences and trying to transform the world into a peaceful one. One of the best known research about nonviolence based on hundreds of case studies shows that how nonviolence is effective, even it's twice effective than violence in achieving goals. And the most recent research by Iker Kalin from the Stockholm universities, it has not only shown that it's effective, as the Erika Chinowit and Maria Stefan research shown, it shows that it's even faster in achieving goals, although sometimes we don't believe in that. But the empirical case studies, he studied more than 350 cases, so shows with empirical data that. But this effectiveness, it's connected with some key things that this is something good to know and something to share with different social and popular movements dealing with violence, is that the effectiveness of nonviolence is very related with high levels of participation. So this is also good to know when people organize nonviolent actions, to know that if you organize very high risk actions, you will have lower levels of participations. So it's better to design actions that can improve the levels of participation. The numbers at the end matter. It's also key, and we know it from Wendy Perlman, for example, in a study on Palestine, that the cohesion of the movement increases the possibility that a movement will use nonviolence. So organizational structure of the movements is also key. We also know, we have learned also that international support can speed up success. So here we have another key when we design a nonviolent campaign. And also that training on nonviolence has an impact. And Consuela Matt and Jonathan Picnic, that by the way, they are already also associates of the Catholic Institute for Nonviolence, will be presenting their most recent research on that and how training on nonviolence has a deep impact on the effectiveness and the success of the movements. I just wanted to share this, and thank you everybody. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Nicholas. You will have opportunity to say a bit more about the, on the ground, how CNI impacts. Before I introduce the second speaker, this is a advice to all. Please put your questions in the Q&A button, because the chat is closed. So, and we expect to see as many questions as possible, but use the Q&A facility. The second speaker is Virginia Saldana. Virginia is a mother of 3 and a grandmother of 8. It's a very busy life, as you can see. She's a theologian, writer, and activist. She's a founder of the Indian Women's Theologians Forum and founder member of the Indian Christian Women's Movement. She's also on the executive of the Catholic Women's Council. For over 20 years, she has worked for the empowerment of women while working or through working with the church in different capacities, with the Archdiocese of Bombay, with the Catholic Bishops' Conference of India, and the Federation of Asian Bishops' Conferences, also known as FABC. She's on the board of a women's legal organization and also a charitable NGO. Over to you, Virginia.
Thank you, Cesar, for the for the introduction. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone across the world. I will speak to you on women and peacemaking. In the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security was adopted unanimously by the UN Security Council on the 31st of October 2000. The resolution acknowledged the disproportionate and unique impact of armed conflict on women and girls. It calls for the adoption of a gender perspective to consider the special needs of women and girls during conflict, repatriation and resettlement, rehabilitation, reintegration, and post-conflict reconstruction. The UN also has a department on women, and that has worked on preparing the whole charter on the Convention Against Violence to Women, called CEDAW, which many countries are a signatory to, which causes a lot of violence in our homes. Now, Nicholas has already spoken to you about the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, so I will not repeat. Through his words and actions, Jesus empowered women and broke many attitudes that did violence to women. Jesus had all power, which he used to give life. But today, the church is entrenched in patriarchy and has moved away from the example of Jesus. So women are left out of decision-making and formulating laws in the church. The present conflicts in the world are examples of display of toxic masculinity and patriarchy. The ignoring of international norms to assert one's own power, to conquer, subjugate, eliminate people as if they are devoid of rights. This is evident in the two wars that have devastated Ukraine and Palestine, especially the present Gaza region. You see, we see these pictures on our screens every day, and they are heartbreaking to see dead children, maimed children, destroyed houses, and people just devoid of all their rights. The Asia-Pacific region have quite a few low-intensity conflicts, mainly internal, like Myanmar, Afghanistan, and recently Manipur in India. Not recently, really, it's since last year. These conflicts are motivated by men as decision makers, and these impact the lives of women, making it difficult to be caregivers and homemakers who sustain life in the family and community. Asia is also a diverse region of culture and religion, where patriarchy and gender stereotypes reign supreme. Women have entered politics to some extent, but unless they are extremely influential and strong, they have little impact. Most women in politics feel they are there at the behest of men. So they hardly ever function outside the patriarchal framework. I'm sorry, I'm reading from my phone, so keep losing. Women can also have a patriarchal mindset. And here are pictures of some of the women we know in history. Sheikh Hasina, most recently in Bangladesh, Indira Gandhi, who was known as the only man in her cabinet, Margaret Thatcher, who was known as the Iron Lady, Golda Meir, also known as the Iron Lady, who was an activist for the Zionist state. Myanmar had a popular woman leader, but she was brought down by the military, who now rule Myanmar with violence and oppression. Research shows that achieving gender equality helps to prevent conflict. And when women are involved in peacemaking, the probability that violence will end increases by 24%. Yet, despite this evidence, the first woman to sign a final peace accord as a chief negotiator is Miriam Coronel Ferrer of the Philippines, as recent as 2014. In June 2025, the DRC Foreign Minister Therese Kaikwamba Wagner and her Rwandan counterpart, Oliver, signed a peace deal brokered by the US to end the 30 years of war. We need more women to be empowered, to develop a women's perspective that is sensitive to life and all aspects and forms of life, and as well as the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you, Virginia. I see that there are, in the Q&A, there are 3 questions already. Please multiply that number. The next speaker is Ruki Fernando. Ruki from Sri Lanka is a human rights peace activist, trainer, and writer. He's a consultant to the Center for Society and Religion in Colombo. This is a human rights center run by the Order of Mary Immaculate. Ruki will speak on recent violence in the politics of Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon from Sri Lanka. It might be morning or night for some, but greetings to all. The violence in Sri Lanka has, I think, different dimensions. One is, I would say, economic violence of massive poverty existing alongside people who have a lot of material resources and who control but also enjoy the fruits of resources that in our Catholic beliefs God has bestowed on us. This led to an armed resistance in 1971, primarily by disgruntled young people in rural areas. It was an attempt to overthrow the government at that time, but it failed as the government reacted in a very brutal way. But interestingly, the group that started this 1971 insurrection later came into democratic politics through parliament, and actually they were in opposition for a long time. And since last year, for the first time, they have come into power. And now they are trying to rule, promising alternative politics of equality, non-racism, etc. We are yet to see the fruits of all that, but at least there is some promise in it that their politics might be different to that of the previous rulers. But importantly, that their politics today is also very different to their politics of 1971, which was a very violent armed insurrection, followed again by late 80s, another violent insurrection by the same group. So I think groups who start off violently can also evolve to engage in resistance and transformational actions in a non-violent way. Widespread kind of economic crisis in around 2021 manifested by the lack of fuel, which we saw long lines of fuel. To get fuel to a vehicle, we had to wait in line for about 3-4 days sometimes. Lack of gas for cooking, which was very popular in Sri Lanka, and also lack of electricity led to a massive people's uprising in 2022. This This was kind of led to a big legacy of people's uprising in Sri Lanka, because we have never seen anything like that. So it's the equivalent of, I think, people power, as it was called in the Philippines or the Middle East some time ago. And it led to an overthrow of a very brutal, racist, corrupt government. Another side of the political violence in Sri Lanka has been directed against the ethnic minorities, particularly the Tamil minority. So this was in the form of denial of self-governance or discrimination. This initially led to non-violent resistance, like, for example, Satyagraha. But there was no proper response, and the failure of non-violent resistance led to violent resistance, the formation of armed groups, and the armed groups started to engage in violent actions, not only against the state, but also against dissenting views within his own community and other civilians. And that particularly was manifested by some of the violent actions that the LTTE, or the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, undertook during 3 decades of war in Sri Lanka. And of course, this led to much more brutal, I would say, counter-violence by the state. So violent resistance led actually to counter-violence of a more serious, brutal nature. But after the end of the war, I think we are back to what I would call non-violent resistance by Tamils. Major Tamil political parties are no longer advocating for armed insurrections and war, but they are still trying to advocate and demand equal rights and self-governance, particularly in the form of a power-sharing arrangement. There's also resistance in terms of very specific issues, for example, land. I was part of a struggle by a Tamil community in the north to regain their traditional land, which has been occupied by the Navy, resulting in them not being able to go home as such for about 25 years. So it was an island, and these people took boats, got into the boats, and defied the Navy and went and took over or regained what was their original land. I was part of that, and I felt very scared at that time because we didn't know whether the Navy will shoot us. But we had taken some precautions, like, for example, the large presence of Catholic priests and nuns, but also journalists and other activists there. Political violence in Sri Lanka has also been directed to other ethnic groups like the Muslims, who are numerically minorities. The third category of political violence, I would say, in Sri Lanka is ill-conceived development projects. And this is very, very present. There's an ongoing struggle in a place called Mannar in Sri Lanka, particularly against wind power that the residents feel is going to harm them. So there has been a peaceful protest for about 57 days, but the government kind of turned its back on the negotiations, and then as a result, the started transporting again wind turbines back to this particular area. And 2 days ago, the residents tried to block it, and this in a peaceful way, sitting in the middle of the road, but this led to a very violent response from the state, where some people were beaten up and hospitalized. This includes women and Catholic priests, because it was a very Catholic majority area, although Sri Lanka is largely a Buddhist majority country. Based on these 3 examples that I mentioned, economy-based violence, violence based on ethnicity, and violence based through ill-conceived development projects, there has been violent struggles as a form of resistance, but there has also been non-violent struggles. So based on these, I'll come to share some reflections before I end. One is that the violence of the oppression, domination, rights violations leads to resistance and responses by those who are oppressed. Sometimes this resistance by the oppressed takes the form of violence, but I think we need to understand, even those of us who advocate for nonviolent action need to understand the nature of this response. As I mentioned, the violent response of the Tamils was largely in the face of lack of response to nonviolent resistance. But it's also, I think, important to recognize there has been lots of nonviolent resistance and struggles in Sri Lanka and, of course, all over the world. I gave a few examples, one at a very macro level in 2022, which led to the overthrow of a very corrupt, racist, authoritarian regime, not just one ruler, but the whole ruling family. And I also cited briefly the struggle of one community to regain their land in a non-violent way. So although we've had a lot of armed resistance to injustice and oppression. We've also had in Sri Lanka non-violent resistance. And I think we need to draw inspiration from these non-violent resistance, which have succeeded to some extent, and some of it in micro level and some of it at macro level. And I think it's important to also mention that the church in Sri Lanka is a minority numerically, except in particular specific areas where they are majority, but they have played an important role. Mostly in areas that they are majority, they have played a kind of a leadership role, but in overall, in other struggles, they have worked together with other people of other faiths, particularly Buddhist, but also people without faiths, and with secular movements like trade unions, student movements, etc. So while the church contribution has been significant, I think we have to take into account the ethnic religious dynamics and play our role sensitively as well. I'll stop here and I'll be around to respond to any questions, comments, or share additional thoughts later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruki. Thank you. I see there are 4 questions. I will go with this question, which I'll present to you. This question may give an opportunity to all the 3 presenters to touch on some of the aspects of this question raised, even though it's about the non-violent, Catholic non-violence initiative. So all presenters feel free to participate in this. The question is, Nicholas, in the area of non-violent practices and strategic power, does the study at the Institute study the layers of power, particularly related to organizational power that has been built on colonization narratives? Nick and
Thank
others,
you.
please.
Yeah, thank you, Cesar, and for the question. Well, the institute has been just been. I mean, it has been just born. It's just born very recently. So now it's working on these 3 areas I presented before. We have 3 coordinating associates of each one of the areas, and now they are focusing on the priorities. They are going to focus on the research and also looking for the researchers, the best researchers in different parts of the world want to become associates of the institute. And so the first and quick answer is no yet, but we are very aware of that colonization narratives, and we are thinking very carefully on how not to reproduce, colonizing models on nonviolence. And probably that starts also with languages. As you all know, most of the researchers are produced mainly in English. So we are also trying to introduce researchers that think and feel in other languages, because that's also key and something that we need.
Thank you. I'll just take this a bit further and talk about the relationship between colonization and the way our societies have moved, especially in Asia Pacific, obviously moved in the direction of male domination and authoritarianism. The question I will raise with the 3 of you, but Virginia and Rukia, obviously. Colonization supposedly ended in most cases like 50, 60, 100 years ago. Do we feel that the patterns of colonizing governments are being repeated today in our times, when the governments are no longer by the colonizers, but by the inhabitants and citizens of those countries? So the link between colonization and its impact and the way government and authority is now being expressed today. What do you think about that? Anyone? Virginia talked about.
The problem is that, when the colonialists left, they, during the term of colonization, they created a lot of divisions among people, like, for instance, they were the ones who created the Hindu-Muslim divide in India. They also, they use the Indian police force to do violence on their own people. So they had already built in a lot of hatred into the system. We had, of course, the Congress government, which was created. Another thing is also, we have to remember that Christianity piggybacked on colonialism. Okay, so Christianity is linked to colonialism, and therefore Christianity is seen as a colonial power. And the kind of, particularly in India, the kind of what you call it, so-called persecution the Christians are experiencing today in India, you can draw its roots back to colonization. So the kind of the whole present fundamentalist government started during the British Raj in India. They started in the 1920s as a response to colonialism. And today they are ruling India with so much of violence, so much of domination, so much of authoritarianism and suppression as well. So these are the, what should I say, the fallout of colonialism. Another thing is also how they divided India and Pakistan and have left a permanent enmity between these two countries.
Yeah. Thank you, Virginia. And obviously the patterns of authority and how power is exercised can be seen in also other countries in Asia. Any thoughts on this, Ruki?
Right. We have also been colonized by the British, and before that, the Portuguese and the Dutch. So I think they have left patterns of domination. Before we used to call them the colonial rulers, but now we have rulers from our own country who kind of follow the path of the British and other colonial powers in terms of domination and marginalizing others. So the feudal system of power, I think, is still there, although the color of those at the helm of it has changed a bit. And I think what Virginia said is also very relevant to Sri Lanka in terms of how communities have been divided, and violence, root cause of violences can be traced back to the colonial times. For example, Sri Lanka had different kingdoms. But the British, when they took over the whole island, brought the kingdoms together for their own convenience of ruling, for their convenience of their administration. And now I think that has remained as a root cause of the violence in Sri Lanka, particularly based on ethnicity, where communities feel, like ethnic minority communities feel, that they don't have a sense of opportunities to govern themselves. So some of these things can be traced back to the colonial time. So I think we are still suffering from the hangovers of the colonial rule and oppression.
Thank you, Ruki. If there's anyone here, and I think there must be people from the Philippines or Japan or Korea or those countries, if they want to make a comment on this, please do. In the meantime, I'll open up another question. This is from Theophili Zawadi Mutende. This is Theo. Is it possible to think of African violence think of African violence, people undergo a lot of war violence. We start with you, Nicholas.
Yeah, we we need to think about it in every different context. We need to pay attention with the specificities of why specific places are dealing with so much violence. In fact, at the Institute on the area of contextual practices of nonviolence, one of our coordinating associates is from Africa, especially like dealing with the with the specific practices on nonviolence in the Africa context to deal with those experiences. And we need to do the same in other contexts like the one we are today here in the Asia Pacific region. We need to bring the experience of the specific violence that people are dealing with and also the specific nonviolence contributions and answers to those violences. For example, Rookie and Virginia were showing before.
Okay, thank you. Virginia, Rookie, any thoughts on this? If you have experience with Africa and the African situation.
I don't have much, unfortunately, so it's a bit difficult for me to respond.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, I mean, though I've not had direct contact with Africa, but from observance, I can say that generally, whether it be indigenous people, whether it be the tribal way of life in Africa, the colonialists came in and destroyed what the local people had built and were used to. You know, they destroyed that whole thing and they imposed their rule, which was Western, which was European, and which was particularly male dominated. And that really upset the pattern of communities everywhere, whether it be the indigenous people of the Americas or the tribal communities of Africa. They disrupted their lives. They removed them from their lands. They took over their lands. So a lot of injustice was done. And so a whole generation that grew up under their rule grew up assimilating that, those ideas of violence. And that's why today they are the ones who are perpetuating it. That's the way I look at it.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll open up another question. 1 minute. This is a quick one. Before I go to the question, there's a comment from Gail Galang. It's a comment. The Philippines was also colonized by Spain, America, Japan. I agree that there seems to be a new look into colonization. Fellow men and women and families in the upper rich class, dominate poor people in their provinces in the same way as earlier colonizers, creating dependence and subservience. Thank you, Gail, but this confirms what has been said so far. Thank you for that. There's a question from Katrina Devlin. This is more directly related to Nicholas. Does the Institute offer courses, seminars, etc., for people to learn more about active nonviolence?
Thank you for that question. Yes, we are starting to offer those courses, although the main aim is not strictly to offer those courses, but also to encourage people to be trained by other organizations that are doing a very good work in different places. So we also promote the trainings of others, but the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative have started to give some online courses, so to make them more available for everybody. We have started in a course for mainly for Latin America in Spanish language, and by the beginning of next year, 2026, we will be offering a course, an online training on active nonviolence in English that we will invite all of you to be part of that. And I wanted to connect this also the trainings with the questions and the comments before on colonization, and I like very much how you explain it, Virginia. And it's important to mention that specifically colonization, it's also it imposes a cultural colonization, and that it's still there. So, and that cultural colonization is precisely the one who allows the culture of violence. So when we talk about transformation, cultural transformation and nonviolence, we need to rethink ourselves on how to do it. So we are also very aware of that, and we also we all the time try to work from the reality of the people who are dealing with the conflicts and the violences. So we don't prepare like a standard course. What we need is the people to be at the local level to share their reality, their concerns, their violences, and we work from there. Because the training has to be from the people, and we accompany them, we offer some resources, we bring researchers, and but we need the experience, the concerns, and the reality of the people who want to lead with that from a nonviolent approach.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. Ruki, you want to say something about training?
Yes, maybe to add to what was already said. So in my experience in Sri Lanka, much of the training, or let's say the learning, has not necessarily happened in a webinar or in a workshop or seminar or in a course, academic course, but much of it has happened on the ground with participation in actual struggles. Like that is very true for me personally, because I learned nonviolent direct action by joining hands with communities whose rights were violated, communities who are affected by war and violence in their resistance initiatives. That is how I learned, and that is why I think I have been able to share with other groups and students, etc. Last couple of years, I was working with a community who have been landless for generations, for about 200 years. So since 2023, they waged a non-violent struggle, but involving direct actions of fencing up and occupying some land which they felt that they should be theirs. And they were successful because the nonviolent direct action led to a negotiation. It led to also to a court case being withdrawn, and it led to a legal agreement being signed by the owners who have denied them land by offering them land. And later on, there was a particular organization that offered to build them houses, gave them a grant to build houses on the lands that they struggled and gained. So more recently, when a community from another province, far away, about 5 hours away from that particular community that I mentioned, were facing a similar eviction, and they also haven't been having the right to land for a long time. So when I met that community, what I did was arrange a visit from that second community to the first community who had already engaged in nonviolent direct action and had some success, to learn from the experiences and the strategies adapted from the first community. So I think learning from practical involvement, direct involvement in struggles is very important. And when we talk of learning about nonviolent direct action in particular, of course, this can be complemented by what we discuss in a webinar like this, or in a workshop, or in a more academic course. But I think often the practical dimension of learning by participating in struggles and resistance is not valued enough. And I think it's important to recognize the learning possibilities that exist in purely by joining ongoing struggles of people who are rights have been violated and affected by violence and discrimination. Thanks.
Thanks, Ricky. We're talking about nonviolence. And of course, when we talk about violence, we talk about what we see, what violence does. And we see that in every sphere, from the individual, interpersonal, community, tribal, national, international, geopolitical. And what comes through is this, the attraction for violence. There is this ingrained attitude that if there's a dispute, if there's a conflict, the only way to deal with it is through violence. And violence begets violence. And at the dramatic level, you see what's happening in Ukraine and all those wars taking place. We need to get to the deeper aspect of this violence question as to why is violence attractive to people in power, whatever power, whether it is in a domestic situation or whether it's in a religious situation or a cultural situation or a political situation. Why is violence attractive? And I think we can't answer this question satisfactorily. I mean, we cannot exhaust this question tonight, but at least we should give some attention to it. Any of the presenters? Maggie.
I'm not necessarily responding to your comment at this point. What I want to ask Rookie and Virginia, Rookie and Virginia talked about different types of violence, economic, which I think in, Asia would be highly prevalent. But in Australia, it's the violence is perpetrated against those who are close to us. And women are a significant target of violence in Australia. It's almost, well, I'm not sure what the number is, but it's, one a week easily are being murdered or by their partners or people who are close to them. And I'm just wondering whether this is also prevalent in Sri Lanka and India, or is this something of a Western event? That's my question.
No, Maggie, patriarchy is prevalent in all societies, Domestic violence is very prevalent in India, very prevalent. In fact, there is a Hindu book that came down from one of the so-called teachers called Manu, and it's called the Manu Smriti, where he says that daughters have to be subject to their fathers when they are young, to their husbands when they marry, and to their sons when they grow old. So a woman has to be always controlled by a man. And when somebody is given control over another human being, the tendency to keep that person in line is to use violence. Now, I would identify violence as physical, mental, and emotional, because I have worked with women for the last 30 years. And we have seen these different forms of violence. Now, a man might say, oh, but I've never beaten my wife, but he does a lot of, then even financial violence. He does not give her money adequate to run the house. And he does not, even though she's working, she has to hand over her salary to the husband. The husband controls all the funds and only doles out money to his wife, lest she spends it on things he does not want her to spend it on. So there's total patriarchal domination and control. So you see, even when children are growing up, the control of daughters is more than the control on sons. So the sons literally grew up with the idea that they are free to do what they like, whereas daughters have to be protected and controlled by the man who's supposed to protect her. And this idea that a man has to protect a woman, and a woman who is not protected by a man is seen as fair game. I have been a widow for 49 years of my life, and I know what it was, to grow up in a patriarchal society as a widow. So patriarchy is present across the board, except not so much in tribal societies, at least tribal societies as I know them. This thing, related to violence. Why is there violence? Is it some? I think it is because, again, of the free availability of arms, the transfer of small arms. I remember when I was in Pax Christi, we were talking about this and we were asking for the control of arms, Now, see, the manufacture of arms is an industry that is really fueling a lot of economies in the north, where the US, Europe, many countries are selling arms to South countries, and arms are the cause of conflicts. You have a gun, you will shoot. So today, the transfer of small arms and the circulation of small arms all over the world and the availability is something that also fuels conflicts, and that causes so much of violence and death. Now, if activists everywhere, all over the world, are telling their countries, stop providing arms to Israel, so that the conflict will have to stop. But who is listening? Nobody is listening. So you see, I find that is another very, very important aspect of violence that we have to deal with. And this is the manufacture and the distribution and sale of arms.
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you. I see, Nicholas, you want to say something?
Yes, just to add on the question of Maggie, I wanted to share just briefly my own personal experience training women who were suffering violence from their partners or even from their sons. And I train these women on nonviolent strategies at home, to develop some of the nonviolent action resistance that we learn from, dealing with political violence, how to develop them and adapt them to the domestic sphere, and with great success. I just wanted to share that because we have that experience, and it was it gives a lot of hope on the things that we can do.
Thank you. Ruki, you have your hand up? Do you want to say something, Ruki? You're muted.
I think I will briefly mention about why I feel that sometimes very violent to injustice, oppression, and my experience, including the one that I cite in relation to the Sri Lankan war, the lack of support for nonviolent initiative, particularly nonviolent direct action, or classing or kind of identifying nonviolent direct action as violent or illegal, and so forth, I think leads to a lot of frustration, leads about the effectiveness of nonviolent action. So it's important to support nonviolent direct action in as much as possible by churches, by other different faith groups, by secular groups, so that those engaged in nonviolent direct actions feel supported, and are encouraged to continue to engage in that. In the absence, I think in the past in Sri Lanka, it has led to nonviolent direct actions, lack of support for nonviolent direct action, lack of understanding, empathy for nonviolent direct action has led to violent responses to injustices and oppression. So I think this is something that it's important to remember and consider. There is a feeling among some people who engage in nonviolent direct action, particularly communities who are directly subject to oppression, that those who are so-called preachers of nonviolence don't necessarily actually get involved in actions, transformative actions that transform unjust situations. So I think that's something for us to important for all of us to remember.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ruki. I mean, we might finish in about 20 minutes or so. There are 2 or 3 more questions to come. But I'll just make offer a PS to Virginia's comment about violence or absence thereof in indigenous communities. I remember talking to a very famous anthropologist in Australia. Her name is Professor Di Bell. And I met her when she was doing her studies in anthropology, but focused on Aboriginal indigenous women and their role in their society. And she told me that her studies have indicated to her that before the white man came, Aboriginal society, had roles for men and women. And these roles were complementary, and both roles were important and significant and salient to each group, to the men and to the women. So there was a kind of equilibrium. But when the white man came and he met with the Aboriginal communities for whatever reason, in terms of what is happening, what could be done, and all of that, they mainly went to the males, to the men, to get their understanding of what should be done and so on. And she concludes that in time, the attitude of males to be dominant decision makers developed to the point where the women in those communities lost their authority, their significance, and their salience. So it is conditioned in that sense. We have, I mean, this is a very rich topic. We cannot exhaust it, but at least we are touching on some aspects. There are another 2 questions from the chat. Can presenters speak to the value of music, art, and symbolic action as tools of nonviolence practice? If you could be a bit brief, all of you, it's open to all of you.
Okay, maybe I will start. I think music, art, and symbolism has been used a lot in nonviolent direct actions in Sri Lanka. And I think they had wide appeal, and they will continue to have wide appeal. And I think it's very, very important to use symbolism, music, and arts. That's brief answer. I don't want to give examples, but I think that's enough for now.
Yeah, thank you. Nicholas, Virginia, okay.
Yeah, yes. Well, I can share, for example, that at this very moment, the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative Fall Series, that it's a series of webinars that are organized mainly from the States, but brings people from different parts of the world. They are doing their series specifically on this, on what we can call activism, like using art, music, different forms of nonviolent tools during nonviolent campaigns. And I think it's very interesting. You can find them on our social media, and you can learn from different experiences on that. And I just wanted to add also that, for example, this is something that we are also trying to bring to the conversation how important is the ritual dimension, the spiritual dimension of nonviolence, both at the spiritual dimension itself, but also at the practical level. You know, faith organizations can bring some tools, some practices that secular approaches to nonviolence cannot use. And this is something that in the global conversation of nonviolence is more and more appreciated now.
Thank you, Nicholas. Yeah. Another question. There's a comment, I think, from Father Claude Mostovic. He says, in Brazil, a woman is murdered by a close partner or husband every 6 hours. Shocking. A question for Virginia. Could the Catholic Church do more to lead by example in its present approach towards keeping women subjugated?
Yes, definitely. Of course. The Catholic Church is an example of a patriarchal church, as I demonstrated even in my presentation, where you see all men and they're making the laws. Women are not part of decision making. So that's also the example for Catholic families. We have so much of domestic violence in Catholic families. Though Jesus gave a message of peace, he demonstrated how he empowered women, yet that message has not filtered down. It has not filtered down. So patriarchy rules in the Catholic Church, and that does violence to women. The very fact that they will not allow women to be ordained. I mean, they say that Jesus never ordained women. In fact, Jesus never ordained anybody. When did Jesus ordain anybody? The Last Supper was a meal that he shared with everybody. They used the picture painted by Leonardo da Vinci, which showed men. And that is not what happened. His mother Mary, it was a Passover meal, so his mother Mary and his women followers must have all been present at that meal. But these women have been edited out. So patriarchy rules. I think it is for women to be empowered and to keep on knocking and asking these questions and demanding for equality. That's what we have to keep doing. And yes, definitely, that is an excuse for violence to continue unabated in the families. There is a lot of domestic violence in Catholic families, a lot of domestic violence. Like I said, in various forms.
Thank you. This reminds me of a text in one of the Jewish holy books. There's a prayer where the man prays to God, thank you, God, for not making me a woman. And that says a lot. I think we can end with one last exchange. We talked about violence in so many ways and how it impacts in different ways. The fact is, violence, as I said earlier, is attractive to many as a means to resolve a dispute or a conflict. But it is normalized. It's not something that happened yesterday or today. It is normalized. And it normalizes the idea that if you get your way, you use your violence. And that radiates in different directions, whether it be in a domestic situation, whether it be in a social situation where communities are in conflict, whether it is at the national governmental level or at the geopolitical level. So what is the normalization of this is how you treat the other. And I was just reading recently an article on the elders. The elders are well-known men and women, people like Kofi Annan and Nelson Mandela. Of course, he's dead now. But these leaders have formed a group called the elders. They have no budget, they have no military, they have no arms, but they have experience and credibility. And the question is, they're committed to bringing peace and nonviolence. And the present leader of the elders, he's a previous president of Colombia, where for many, many years there was this FARC insurgency. And no matter what they did, it continued. But he found enlightenment during his presidency. He found enlightenment in what the leader of the army said to him. There are two ways of dealing with people in a situation of conflict. You deal with the other as an enemy or an adversary. Enemies, if the other is an enemy, you destroy him, you get rid of him. But if you deal with the other as an adversary, you can talk to him and you can continue talking all your life, but you don't have to kill him. And he said he took that lesson to heart, and since then, they had a different approach in how they dealt with the FARC insurgency. And they treated the insurgents in a different way and so on. Lots to learn. All of these insights that we have learned tonight from different presenters and the comments and so on are a way to enrich our understanding of nonviolence. And those of us who are have responsibility for promoting it, should be aware of all of these dimensions, including the attractiveness for violence. I think on this note, I think we can end on this note. I hope you all agree that it has been a very rich exchange tonight. I hope it has been interesting to all of you. I thank all the presenters for what they have contributed to their experience and learning. I thank everyone who has enriched this event with their suggestions, ideas, and all of that. And I especially thank our colleagues at the PCR, Pax Christi International in Brussels, who gave us their technical support and their expertise for tonight. I thank you all for attending, and I end with this simple prayer. I hope that we all continue or hope to become agents of hope and change in our times. Thank you. The chat is open for 2 or 3 minutes, so please send your messages.
Okay, we are going to end the meeting in a minute. Thank you again to everyone to be part of us tonight. And as I already said, the speaker's material will be available, I think, tomorrow. Thank you again, everyone. and good night.